Did you grow up having an experience of love with your earthly father? And if you did, what was that like? I wonder if you could tell me. I wonder if it was a protective love. I wonder if it affirmed and built your confidence. Was it fun? Did it lead to many dad jokes? Was it firm and stubborn, yet also trusting? Or was it soft and easily to cave in? That's something that I can only imagine. A little personal story time. It's been a while since I shared something personal. I never had that experience. I didn't have an experience of love with my earthly father. Now, growing up in Mexico, I rarely got to see or spend time with him. He was always traveling, either to other cities for work, or he would come to the U.S. for up to a year at a time and work and send money to home. Now, my dad and mom's relationship had been struggling for quite a while. So during one of his trips here to Seattle, he had a conversion experience. And it was to the Seventh-day Adventist faith tradition. So if you're not very familiar with the Seventh-day Adventists, they're very anti-Catholic. And so for my dad, he wanted nothing to do with the faith. And so that only distanced him in his relationship with the family even more. And then it led to eventually the divorce. And at the age of 12, he officially walked away. Now, for most of my life, I didn't really think much of that experience, since he was never a big part of my life to begin with, and I have some memories, but not that many. I never really thought that I had missed much. And, I'd go out with my friends, and I'd go to their homes and visit them, and I would see the nice relationship that they had with their dads, and I would remember thinking, that would have been nice to have had. But that's it. It never really went beyond that. So in my teen years, I started getting involved with church and youth ministry, and I really enjoy it. I'm beginning to discover faith in my relationship with God. But somehow God always seems so distant. Now, I knew God was love, I knew God was justice and compassion and mercy, and I accepted all that. It made sense to me, but it never really clicked at a personal, experiential level. I knew God was there because God was omnipotent, but it was a presence that just seemed distant. So then it wasn't a surprise that at the age of 18, I have this crisis of faith. And even after being heavily involved in youth ministry in the church, that crisis of faith just confirmed in me that, the reason God seems distant is because God didn't exist. And it wasn't until that conversion experience that I'd had a few months later, this overpowering sense of Jesus' presence and Jesus' love for me, that then led to restoring my faith, entering seminary, and exploring the possibility of being a priest. Now, even then, though, even while I was in seminary, I still felt really distant from God. Now, Jesus, for me, we were close. At that time, a really popular shirt was, "Jesus was my homeboy." And that's how I felt with Jesus. We were tight. We were really close. I love Jesus. I wanted to be like Jesus. I'm here now as a priest. But when it came to God the Father, for some reason, that always seemed distant. Anytime I found myself praying, it was always to Jesus. Always. And this coldness and this distance that I felt with God the Father, I didn't really understand, and it bothered me. It did. And so then that's when I went on that 8-day retreat I've told you about. I shared with you some of the fruits that came from that 8-day retreat during our Advent season in some of those homilies. So I'd like to just share with you one more. One of the experiences that helped me understand why God seemed so distant in my life. Now, in one of those hours of prayer, I was given the Bible passage of Jesus' agony in the garden. We're very familiar with it. Just before he's arrested, just before he begins his final journey into Jerusalem. Now, after reading that scene, I close my eyes and then I allow the imagination to begin to its work, to engage Scripture. And I remember I saw myself walking at night in that garden. It was a full moon, partly cloudy, but there was enough moonlight coming down so I could see my surroundings. I was on a hill. There was a lot of olive trees. There was a lot of large stones and boulders just scattered throughout, and I walked quietly. I knew Jesus was around there somewhere. I was looking for him. I saw on my left the disciples. They were sleeping under the tree, and I passed by them unperceived. And after a bit of continued walking, I heard grunting. I approached where that sound was coming from, and there he was. Moonlight was glaring down, revealing a man on his knees. His arms were tensed. His hands were grasping a large stone. He was looking up to heaven, and with tears in his eyes and the look of defeat and fear and distress unlike anything I had ever seen is what he had. Now, I hesitated to get close, but I felt like I needed to. And as I got closer, I could see the red sweat just coming down his face, coming down his cheeks. And then that's when he began speaking. And what I heard him say was, "Father, please, if possible, take this away from me. I do not want to go through this." And then after saying these things, he would look up at the sky, awaiting a response, hoping that his father would show up or do something and help him, but nothing happened. His father was nowhere to be found. Now I'm at the side and I'm witnessing this. And at the moment of seeing Jesus completely vulnerable, completely afraid, asking his father to come and help him, but being completely ignored, I felt this sense of anger just come over me. I could feel my whole body tense up, my face get flushed red, my arms are tense, my hands go into a fist, and then I just start yelling. I start yelling at the sky. I remember saying, "What are you doing? Do you not see your son who is here suffering, asking for your help? Do you not see your son pleading for you? Why are you not doing anything about it? Didn't you say that he was your beloved son? Is this your definition of beloved son? Is this what it means for you to be a father? To abandon your children?" And so then I'm feeling enraged, indignant. I myself am feeling defeated, annoyed, desperate, very disappointed at God. And then that's when, in that anger, something comes out of me that made me come to my senses. I said, "You are not loving. You are not merciful. You are not all good. You are not compassionate. You have abandoned your son. You are just like my father." At that moment, I just remembered chills. Just feeling the chills, and I felt my whole body tremble. Then I fall to my knees, and I realized that was my garden. That was my agony. The words of Jesus were the words that all my life I had been saying silently and didn't realize it. And I felt that God wasn't with me. I realized that the distance I felt God had with me was not because God was indeed distant or uninterested. It was because I didn't realize just how much that experience of my own earthly father had actually affected me. And it was an experience that I was unknowingly projecting onto God. And Jesus needed to heal that. And that is one of the things that Jesus came to do, and one of the things that he is doing for us in this very beloved, very known parable. Now, we often think of this parable or call it the parable of the prodigal son. But really, it should be called the parable of the father's love. Jesus begins the parable with, a man has two sons. He's talking and focusing on the man, the father, not the sons. Now, Jesus knows the Father. He came to reveal the glory of God the Father to us, but immediately he was met with resistance. Immediately he was met with rejection. And as he's beginning to show us and tell us about this Father that he knows, he quickly found out that the reason that people were so dismissive of the gospel message to the point of full-on rejecting it and being angered by it was because of the wounds that had shaped how they thought how God was and how God should be. And that is what made God distant. And a lot of those projections onto God came from their own broken relationships with each other. Now, those two sons are examples of two of the common attitudes that he noticed in people that make this seeming distance, right? The first son walks away after a life of self-interest. Then he has an aha moment. He comes to his senses, and then he feels completely unworthy. And he figures his father would be too ashamed and disappointed, and the only way that he could possibly be back was to lower himself and be treated by the father the way that he deserved. No longer a son, just a worker. He would figure that's how the father would treat him, because most likely that's how he would have treated others as well. The second son did not walk away. He lived in that same house faithfully, but he felt angered when he noticed that the father expressed the acceptance over someone who did not appreciate him. So now he's feeling unappreciated, as if it was the father now creating a distance from him, not treating him the way that he should be treating him, and treating the brother the way that he should not be treating the brother. So sometimes it seems like we are abandoned by God. Other times it seems like we are abandoning God. Now these attitudes, they create a distance in those relationships. As I said, Jesus here is healing the attitude that separated the brothers from each other and consequently separated them from the Father. I hope this triggers Cain and Abel that represents the brokenness of human relationships. And as soon as that human relationship was broken, there was a distance between us and God. Here Jesus is healing that experience, that very human experience. So then healing is coming with the realization that the Father is responding differently than how we think God should respond, with unconditional love. But there's more to the story than just unconditional love. And Luke wants to bring out another point to it. And that is why he places this parable right after two other short parables. They go together. Now, all three parables end the same way, and that's the key, how they end. The first short parable right before this is the parable of the lost sheep. It ends, "I tell you, in just the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than in the parable of the lost coin. In just the same way, I tell you, there will be rejoicing among the angels of God over one sinner who repents." And then we have this parable, "But we must now celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found." So Luke is stressing joy. The joy in which God the Father looks for us, at us, regardless of what has been our attitudes or how our own image of God has been shaped by our own experiences. So then Jesus in this parable, he's talking to the Pharisees, he's addressing the Pharisees, and they themselves had taken the attitude of that oldest son. Right? They were the faithful ones. They were the ones doing the duty, the religious duty. So they couldn't understand how it was possible that Jesus was talking about a God that was so merciful that anyone who didn't put in the work could possibly be deserving of that same love and grace that should only belong to them, the ones who do the work, not the sinner, not the unfaithful, not the unbeliever. Then Luke is recounting this story, this parable, to his own community. Gentiles, non-Christians who were now converted. And they were taking the attitude of the youngest son. Because for most of their life as Gentiles, they didn't know God, they didn't know Christ. They live a godless life. They didn't know the gospel, and so they have a conversion experience. They come to their senses. They're baptized, but now they're coming to deal with having to face the past and everything that their past represented, all of their sinfulness in the past. And so one of the attitudes that were coming to them is, how can God ever accept someone like me? Is He really that merciful and loving? Is my baptism really something that God desired or sees as something special? So yet, for this, Jesus came. Remember the premise of Luke's gospel? The first announcement that Jesus gave in the synagogue? I've come to bring glad tidings to the poor and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor for all. Now it is a message of joy that Jesus came to bring and that Jesus is determined to proclaim, no matter how painful the journey to Jerusalem may be, so that we might finally come to understand and experience that Father that He knows, that Father that so often our own experiences tend to portray as differently. I don't know if you grew up experiencing the joy and love of your earthly father. I know I didn't, and I've come to learn just how much Jesus had to heal that own relationship so that I could also heal that image of God. Now, in that retreat, I finally had to face the fact that, I did come from a broken home. I had to deal with the fact that, Dad did leave, and that it was a bigger deal than I thought it was, and how it affected me in many ways, including my spiritual life. Yet despite my own anger that came out both for my dad and for God, despite that distance that relationship created for me, both in my human relationships and with God, I identify as the oldest son. Throughout the years, I've come to grow in an appreciation of that life experience, even for my own agony in that garden. Because it is a way of allowing Jesus to slowly help heal my and your and our own experience with our own broken relationships that might result in broken relationship with God or anger with God. No, Jesus has taught me that no, God is not like my Father. He's not like yours either, as great or bad as He might have been. God the Father is not like you or me, thankfully, or anyone else for that matter. Nothing can compare to the joy-filled, unconditional love of God. And Jesus is beginning to give us a little glimpse of what that means in this parable. He's getting ready to show us the fullness of what that means when He is once again on a hill, on a different kind of garden, a garden of skulls. So the parable of the prodigal son is the parable of the Father's love for you, for us.